It's not calling you Josh Frydenberg, it's calling you Dosh Frydenberg.
Under the coalition, taxes for hard-working Australians will always be lower.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in the control room.
They're answers that only can come from Victoria, I'm afraid, because that's not my job.
But I ain't spending any time, though, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person is torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Well, g'day, listeners, and welcome once again to the Two Jacks, episode 78, coming to you today, where we look at all things around Australia and then have a good look around the rest of the world to see what's going on there. And joining me, as usual, is Hong Kong Jack. G'day, mate. How are you?
Excellent.
How are things in Hong Kong today? Hot and sweaty?
Hot and sweaty, yep.
Yeah, nice and cool down here in the Highlands. Lovely sunny days, but boy, gee, you'll get a chill in the morning. And the big story today, Jack, is Julian Assange has been released.
Yes, just saw a video of him hopping on the plane in London heading to Saipan.
The Northern Mariana Islands, Jack.
He is. He looked okay. A pair of blue jeans and a shirt. Looked like a standard, slightly podgy 52-year-old, whatever he is, 51, 52.
Yeah, a bit of a prison tan, a bit pale, I did notice.
He's been pale all his life, I think.
That may
Julian.
well be true. But this is proof that diplomacy works, surely. You and I have discussed this matter just as a background thing. We think that he had been in jail for way too long for even what he's alleged to have committed. And regardless of what we think of him, we just think that my view is certainly, and I think yours is similar, is that the punishment is nowhere near fitted the crime. He's been locked up for way too long.
Yeah, that's partly. I would add that that's partly been as a result of actions he's taken. He's made his own situation worse quite often.
Yes. Look, does it mean that our toilets are not safe, Jack, when he does return to Australia, that he might sort of take up residence in the Brasco at home? You'll go in. You'll go in for an ablution, and Julian might have set up camp in there.
Well, I think it's even worse than that. It's that he doesn't use them, use the toilets. Kathy Lett, the Australian author, said that they put him up for a time when she was still with Jeffrey Robertson, when they were married. And her only comment on it was that, unfortunately, he's not house-trained.
Yeah, I have heard those stories. Look, I only mention this joke. People used to call him Cupboard Boy, but where he took up residence in Ecuador was, in the Ecuadorian embassy, I should say, in London, he basically, they had to refurb the women's toilet for his benefit, which meant that women who worked in the Ecuadorian embassy had to go up a couple of flights of stairs. But look, I think in the end it's good. I think what has been seen is that quiet diplomacy. You don't get anywhere by yelling and screaming to the American authorities, but quiet diplomacy has worked.
Yeah. Look, it's I think there have been a lot of goes without getting there. The Americans were pretty reluctant to agree to this, but they've eventually come around. And sometimes you have to be patient, and it's worked.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, he was charged with fairly serious offences. The intelligence agencies and so, certainly the intelligence agencies in the United States are very reluctant to let those responsible for breaches and publishing breaches of classified information are very reluctant to show any mercy, generally speaking. So this has taken a fairly long time, very quiet diplomacy. It might go all the way to Albanese talking with Joe Biden, and in the end, he will be released. He's expected to plead guilty when he does get to Saipan, Jack, which is sort of north of Guam, isn't it? An American protectorate.
east of the Philippines, north of Guam. It's sort of a bit of a holiday spot for the Japanese.
Right. So, yes, he's expected to plead guilty to a felony charge of conspiring to obtain and distribute classified information. And then he'll be pretty much he'll have to plead before a judge, and that, as we understand it, that'll be the end of the matter, and he will return to Australia to a book deal, presumably a fairly substantial book deal.
The agreement is that he will be sentenced to the amount of time he's already spent in prison.
Yeah, that's right. So, I think in the end it has worked. These things can't be done very, very quickly. I think we're all, regardless of what sympathies we may have had for Assange, we felt that he'd been in prison for way too long. And he's coming home. What now for him, I suppose, is the question. What does he do? Does he keep firing up WikiLeaks? Does he see some of his old hacking mates are none too pleased with him?
He tends to leave a trail of broken friendships behind him wherever he goes.
Yeah, and
that's not a good reason for keeping him in jail.
Well,
but,
the problem I have, just in case listeners are unsure of this, I mean, he was selling politically hot information to the Russians about the Americans. Now, he wasn't charged with those offences, but you have to question the motives of a fellow who decided to move away from the Democrats and throw his hat in the ring for Donald Trump. But there he goes. He's a free man, and one presumes will be a celebrated figure in Australia for some time. Just keep an eye on your toilet. That's all I'm asking. Just keep an eye. You might just find you've got someone settling in there. Now, Jack, you want to talk about Governor General's pay? Do they get paid enough? I think they do, don't they?
Well, I think the last bloke was getting about $450 per annum. Plus
well, it's not as if they're paying. It's not as if they're shouting the bar. I mean, they don't pay for anything.
No. They're looked after very well. I can recall being at a dinner party where a prospective Governor General was there with his wife, and they had a sort of a visit to Government House in Canberra to meet the existing governor, and she was quite delighted because your bags are taken away from you when you go upstairs. Your bags are unpacked for you and placed in the drawers, all that sort of stuff. So the degree of service is quite high.
Well, you are effectively the head of state in Australia.
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
So what's the kerfuffle about the money?
Well, they've raised the pay, I think, from about $450 to $700.
Yeah, that's a nice little pay increase. It's more than 4%.
It is, and there's a fair bit of kerfuffle about that. But we have to remember that the Constitution says that you can't alter the Governor General's pay while they're in office during those 5 years. So,
really?
What that?
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah. Section 3 is my recollection, and what that means is that a practice has developed of reviewing the Governor General's pay and conditions in between appointments, so that they start on an appointment and that will be it for the 5 years. That won't alter for the 5 years.
So Sam Mostyn will become our GG on the big dough now on $709,017, Jack. That's right.
Yeah. Plus, of course, the even better deal is that once you cease to be the Governor General, it's 60% of that, and until you cash in your chips.
And so nothing to do. This salary increase has got nothing to do with making David Hurley's wife stop singing. I thought they might have slung him a few bob and said, "Look, can we just back off on the singing?"
$300K would have been worth it to get that to stop.
It's a good money well spent. But this is about the Mostyn appointment not so much the existing arrangement for David Hurley. You would have to think that David might be thinking, hang on a minute, they've just doubled the salary for the job that I'm doing.
Yes, yeah. Well, that will be a lesson to him. Don't have your wife singing at dinner parties.
Yeah, all right. Now, rather sad news. Donald Sutherland, wonderful actor, dead at 88. He died, or the announcement of his death came last week, announced by his son. Wonderful actor. As I said, Kiefer, his son, announced it. He said, with a heavy heart, I tell you that my father, Donald Sutherland, has passed away. I personally think one of the most important actors in the history of film. Never daunted by a role, good, bad or ugly. He loved what he did and did what he loved. And no one can ever ask for more than that, a life well lived. I certainly think that's absolutely right. He starred in over 200 films, Jack, over 100 television series as well, and some very serious films, and then he'd do some silly things too. So it tells you that he was a man who never took himself too seriously. He was in National Lampoon as the very earnest, dope-smoking lecturer or tutor, and he was in the Kentucky Fried Movie. He was also in The Wonderful Clute, which I think was Academy Award nominated, may not have won. I think Jane Fonda might have won for Best Actress in that film. And of course, MASH. We can't forget Hawkeye Pierce, the great character in MASH, which is, if you haven't seen it, listeners, or haven't seen it for a while, check it out. It is one of the great anti-war films, made in 1970 in the heart or in the latter part of the Vietnam War, and of course based around a military surgical hospital during the Korean War, and the film is a very different and very it really just makes fun of everything, but with a great sort of heart to it around the horrors of war. It would mean MASH, the 1970 film, should be on your must-watch list. It is a wonderful film.
Unless you're offended by making fun of women or something.
Well, there might be that. Yes. What was Hawkeye's nemesis?
Hot Lips Houlihan.
Hot Lips Houlihan. Yes, and they gave her a bit of buggery. Of course, the MASH theme that we remember from the TV series that ran, God, I don't know, 12, 14 series. It was Suicide is Painless. That was the title of the song.
It was.
So very sad. One of those great stalwarts. Every time he appeared in a movie, you knew it was well worth watching. He was a great actor. Now, Jack, the nuclear debate.
He was. Just before we go, I've got to say this about Donald Sutherland. He was good even in bad movies.
Yeah, like Kentucky Fried Movie, a bit of junk, bit of fun junk, but everything. He brought a gravitas to even that sort of junky stuff.
But that awful Oliver Stone movie, JFK.
Yeah, I mentioned that one too, and it is awful. He played X in that. He played this.
He was only in 2 scenes, I think, but he was the best thing in the movie. My personal favourite was one that I saw way back in boarding school, Kelly's Heroes.
And of course, didn't he play that sort of whacked-out hippie tank commander who was always on about the negative? See what you've done with those negative waves. Very, very funny role. Valet Donald Sutherland, but we can't stop on that too long, Jack, because Peter Dutton has taken the coalition into stated a policy. Well, you couldn't call it a policy, really. What would you say? It was an announcement that 7 of our power stations will be transformed into nuclear reactors. We don't know if they're large scale or small scale. Or the small modular reactors. I was just, I got a mention on Media Watch over my column yesterday, so I had to watch it this morning. I don't normally watch the program, but just to see. Media Watch was pondering how News Corp's response to this has been fairly muted, and it has been because there's just not enough detail here. This is nothing more than an announcement. Now they've got stuff that they're going to bring out. They say they're going to have it all costed and deliver that to the Australian people. As it stands, the policy is to compulsorily acquire, if necessary, seven electricity generating stations around the country, all in marginal coalition, mainly marginal National Party seats. Your thoughts, Jack?
Well, the costings will be like the costings of building submarines. They'll be a guess. Anything of this complexity that you say you're going to build over a period of 10 years, you can have a stab at how much it's going to cost, but it doesn't bear much relationship to the reality. That's just history tells us that.
Look, I wonder politically how this works, Jack. Let's make a couple of little small assumptions that the Teals, with a Labor Party in government, that they were really struggling to make sort of inroads around their main driver, their main reason for being candidates and then MPs was over climate change and inaction, what they believed was inaction about it. And so that's fired up the Teals. It'll mean seats like Bradfield and Menzies may become winnable for the Teals, not so much for Labor. So I just wonder about the sense in this, Jack. I mean, Peter Dutton and the coalition are appealing to a place where they've either in regional Australia where they're quite strong through the Nats, or in the outer suburbs where they're not strong and don't have a lot of people have a lot of boots on the ground. It is one of those things that just makes you wonder, what are they thinking?
Yeah, part of it depends on how well the respective parties play it. And Labor got off to a poor start. There was all this stuff about
I agree.
Drawing 100 kilometre circles around these sites and saying everyone's going to have to take iodine tablets. And my response to that was, gee, when I go to France, they whack the iodine in the wine.
Yeah, I actually agree with you there that playing, the Simpsons three-eyed fish memes and all this sort of stuff. It is not the way to go. The way to go is to knock this off with data, with hard facts, and by not having that sort of scare campaign. That's what I think too. So I think it was a mistake. It is based on. I looked at some focus group stuff coming out from around the nuclear debate, and the big issue is safety, Jack, for people there. There's not a lot of support, it must be said, for going nuclear, and very, very pronounced by women. So twice as many women oppose nuclear as support it, and one of the fundamental things that they have is safety. I mean, that's a perception, and that's really down to Peter Dutton and the coalition to try and change. The issue I've got with it's pretty clear. If you read my column last week, it was that by the time you get these things built, Peter Dutton says the small modular reactors will be in place in 2035 and the large-scale nuclear reactor in place by 2037. First thing to say about that is no one in the political sphere will be around then. Right? Virtually no one. Certainly Peter Dutton won't be around. I doubt that Anthony Albanese will be around in 2037. But these are very, very limp sorts of dates. The experience around the world is that some of these nuclear power plants take a long, long time to build. The large-scale reactors in particular generally got a lead time of 14 to 20 years. And, of course, I mentioned Hinkley C Power Station in in Somerset, that I think, that was commissioned. Well, not commissioned. It was set aside as a proposal in 2004. Soil turned in 2017. The EDF, the French nationalised electricity giant, who's building it, and will bill the UK or bill UK consumers once it's done, and with some Chinese money, by the way. It's here we are. 7 years later? Now they're saying it'll come online maybe in 2030, maybe in 2031, at a cost of 87.5 billion. That's in their latest statement. So that's an absolute nightmare. There are some peculiarities around the design, I'm told. I'm not a nuclear engineer, so I can't help you any more than that have caused delays. It was also, construction was held up during the COVID pandemic as well. But 87.5 billion Australian dollars to provide ultimately 11% of the grid in Great Britain. Pretty pricey, mate.
Yeah, they've got a problem with their cost of power. I had a bit of a search around. I'm no particular fan of nuclear. Personally, my view is that we keep using fossil fuels because we're going to have to, and we will. And because whatever we do, sub-Saharan Africa, they need cement, plastic, steel, synthetic fertilizers, all of which come from fossil fuels. So the idea that we're going to stop using fossil fuels is just fairyland.
But you've got to reduce it, Jack. I mean, if scientists are telling us you have to reduce your carbon output, then we need to do it. Otherwise,
people aren't going to agree with you. That's the trouble. Enough people around the world just will not do that. They don't want to be poor.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not an excuse to do nothing, is what I'm saying. I mean, yes, I understand the developing world will require, let's say, coal, will require, let's say, fossil fuels for things like you mentioned there. And the EU was very keen for sub-Saharan Africa to have a chemical fertiliser plant somewhere in there. Then they looked at the carbon emissions and said, no, you can't have that. So that is a bit unfair. But the problem you've got with this, I just want to stick straight with the politics on this, and I think it's potentially disastrous for the Liberal Party. I was at a party on Saturday night and people were talking about it, and someone said to me, he says, well, people are talking about it, so it's got to be a good idea. I said, just because people are talking about something doesn't mean it's a good idea, mate. I remember a lot of people were talking about cold fusion 20 or 30 years ago, and that didn't lead to very much. The sort of changing the conversation is not necessarily a political win. And some of the polling I'm seeing so far would indicate that certainly the coalition's got a long way to go to convince Australians that this is a good idea.
Yeah, this has all got a long way to go, and the debate's got many different little alleyways and that it can run down before we get to a real picture for it.
Yeah, look, there's talk that the large-scale reactor will be Loy-Yang. Now, that's only a whisper, that's only a rumour, and that's the old power plant down in Gippsland, and that is a marginally held seat by Darren Chester, who's been a very good minister in his time, very good minister of Veterans Affairs, made a lot of very significant reforms there in what was a pretty messy old portfolio. And you just wonder what sort of consultations taken place with him in particular, and how happy they are about all of this. Someone like Darren Chester might be about this policy announcement.
Yeah, a good friend of mine used to spend 1 week in four down at in the Latrobe Valley at Yallourn on work. And you'd see him on a Sunday and said, I'd say, "You're going to be around during the week?" He says, "No, I'm off to Chernobyl." And it was universally described as Chernobyl in those days because it was the industrial heartland of Victoria, and it was heavily polluted. It may well be that a nuclear power plant would clean the place up a little bit.
I was in touch with the bloke on Twitter. He'd heard the conditional release program's discussion on nuclear, and he pointed out to me. He said, I won't give you his name because I haven't mentioned this to him, but he pointed out to me, look, I'd made a mistake. I'd confused Yallourn with Loy Yang. But he said Loy Yang was originally his family farm going back some generation called Sunnyside Station, Jack. Compulsorily brought from our family to start the open cut. He said Yallourn is a real basket case, as is Hazelwood. Not really sure what the best outcome will be besides fill them with water for boating. So we had a bit of an exchange about it. I said it might be a place for some affordable housing, but he said, no, might have to go. I don't think they make elevators that long. So it looks like Loy Yang might be the large-scale nuclear reactor. But as I say, it's all very much back of the beer coaster stuff at the moment, and they need to do a whole lot better. There's a potential disaster there. I notice Chris Mitchell and I are of one mind on this alone, that we believe that it could be a great act of political self-harm.
It could be. Some of the things are fixable, I think. I don't think that the safety aspects will hold up. I mean, we all love going to France for a holiday, and you can't get 100 kilometres from a nuclear power station in France.
Yeah, I think that's the wrong way to oppose this. But certainly the community, as I understand it, looking at the focus groups, looking at the polling, their primary issue is safety. But I think the government has to say, look, this is crazy. So even on the back of the beer coaster estimates from Peter Dutton, he said he could get a small modular reactor built for $5.5 billion. CSIRO says no, closer to 8, but let's stick with Peter's just to be generous. So let's say there's going to be 6 of them and one large-scale nuclear reactor. So 6 at 5.5, that's $33 billion. And then the large-scale nuclear reactor, well, I'll look at Plant Vogtle in Georgia just for some costings there. That's $38 billion. So what have we got? $71 billion. That's providing less than 10% to the grid on the back of the envelope stuff that we've got. That seems like a lot of that would mean that decarbonising the entire grid in Australia will cost potentially $800 billion. Now, the government's costings on renewables is $110 billion. That's the sort of private investment they get. Plus, of course, you've got some of these schemes actually weigh in as profit sharing with the Commonwealth. So there's actually some revenue coming into the Commonwealth coffers. And, of course, the big issue, I think, for the coalition is that they are essentially nationalising these 7 nuclear power plants, which is anathema to Conservatives as a general rule. But the money just seems, even at their own back of the beer coaster quotes just seems nowhere near. It just seems like it's going to be a very, very expensive exercise. And even if they can bring it online by 2035 and 2037 respectively, they're going to pay at least $70 billion to do that, which will contribute less than 10% to the grid, according to energy specialists.
Well, it's
so
always
they've got a lot of
promise.
gaps to fill, haven't they? And I just think, it's going to be a credibility issue ultimately, because they can't walk away from it now. They can't say, look, we made a terrible mistake. One of those we mentioned on our program last week, Jack, we went through some of the pithy sayings that politicians came up with. Well, my favourite one will always be, and we didn't mention it last week, I misheard the question and then I misspoke. So they won't be able to do the I misheard the question and I misspoke. They are all in behind this, and it could get very, very messy for them. We'll see. All right. Now, New South Wales is going, they've just had their budget. The great state of New South Wales got their budget going, and they've made some significant steps towards housing, towards solving the or at least ameliorating the housing crisis in the state, particularly in Sydney. And they've announced a $6.6 billion building homes program that will build 8,400 new public houses or public dwellings. Half of these homes will be dedicated to women and families experiencing domestic violence. They will spend a large amount of money fixing 33,500 public housing blocks, whether they're flats or houses. Deliver over 21,000 affordable and market homes across our state, and delivered a record investment in homelessness services, over $500 million, and properly fund crisis accommodation, all while building the homes we need to tackle long-term homelessness. It goes on, Jack. Good policy. How's it going to work?
It will work at the margins. The real problem with the cost of housing in New South Wales is the planning system.
Is the what?
Is the planning system.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. We've talked about this almost ad nauseum. You've got, large chunk of the Australian Greens, and quite a few Labor people who don't want any change in the places where they either dwell or where they have investment properties. That's part of the problem. I think Melbourne's done it better than Sydney. I don't know if you've had a good look around Melbourne recently, Jack, but it's very different in style, where there's medium density housing way out into the suburbs now, with dual occupancies and units being built in townhouses and these sorts of things. When you drive around the inner west and west of Sydney, you see not so much of it, not nearly as much of it. All you see is basically someone's tacked on another story onto the house. That's that sort of thing on the quarter-acre block. Yeah.
We talked about Auckland last week, and they've shown this can be done, and it actually works. What the New South Wales proposal is sort of bog standard, particularly for it's actually for both sides.
It's Band-Aid stuff, isn't it? Really, I mean, it's good policy. It will create a lot. Probably the best thing about it is that it will create either better and new public housing, which has largely been forgotten for a long time. So that's a good thing, and it will have impacts on homelessness.
But it's classic modern politics. There's a problem. Let's spend some money on it. They'll make it better.
Yeah, but at the same time, to be fair to Minzy and the Labor government in New South Wales, they brought in a lot of people into the parliament to talk about how, particularly local government, to talk about how they could look at rezoning things, and it was the usual shit fight of vested interest, Jack. And that's
It's better than it's better than doing nothing. But if they're going to get serious about it, pop on the plane, go over to Auckland and have a look.
Oh, yeah. We talked about Houston as well, Jack. And, when you're living in highly populated, we are the most urbanised country on earth. Our population centres are in the major capital cities. What we really need to do there is start being a little bit smarter about housing design and zoning, so we can put more dwellings on land. The quarter acre block, mate. That's a fantasy, really. It should be a fantasy, certainly if you live within 10 kilometres of the city.
It doesn't suit me anyway. I like living in flats, in a high rise.
Got to live in them. Got to mow the lawns, mate.
I haven't mowed a lawn for a very long time. Speaking of sending ministers to have a look at this is an old story, Jack, but there was a time when there was a Minister for Transport in New South Wales, and they wanted to show him how the MRT worked, the mass rail transit system worked in Singapore. So they organised the meetings, said, look, we can go next week. And there was a problem with that because the minister didn't have a passport.
Well, to be fair, Jack, I'm just applying for mine at the moment. I'd let mine.
He had never had a passport.
He'd never had one.
But never had a passport.
Well, I'm in the business of applying for one, mate. And I tell you what, I've just got the fingers crossed that it'll arrive in time before I take off, or I won't be able to take off. I'll be like the minister. Meanwhile, Jack, Lisa Wilkinson's left her sunglasses and her car keys in court, so she's popped back, and it may not be the smartest move. She is seeking to overturn Justice Michael Lee's finding that her conduct in the Brittany Higgins story was improper and unjustifiable, claiming the judge made more than 50 errors in Bruce Lehrmann's failed defamation case against her and Network 10.
The first thing I'd ask myself, if you are required to act
the
for
obvious
her,
question to me, Jack, is why?
Well, what good's going to come out of it for her? I mean, everybody in the country's kind of made up their mind what they think about the Lehrmann.
I think so.
The Lehrmann Higgins.
And if we're looking at
thing.
diminishing reputational damage, it's not as if she wins this, they're going to pop her on the $5 note.
No, and it's not as though rehashing all of this in court's going to help her reputation one bit. I wouldn't have thought.
Well, meanwhile, of course, Jack, Bruce Lehrmann is representing himself in the appeal. That's a bold move, shall we say?
Yeah. I watched this happen a couple of times, people representing themselves in serious matters. It doesn't seem to go very well.
There would be a long history of it not going very well, I would imagine. And, of course, Mr. Lehrmann is before the courts with allegations, facing allegations or charges of a statutory rape in Toowoomba at the moment. But, yes, you have to wonder, I mean, are we dealing with people with glass jaws, Jack? Is that the issue? Is that when we're talking about Wilkinson? I mean, do they consider themselves that highly that they go, okay, I'll go back again? So she's not going to be funded by Channel 10 here, is she? This is all off her own back.
She's in dispute with Channel 10 about the payment of any fees at this stage. And they're going to have to pay some of her fees, but not all, I would think. It's...
Could be grim times at the Fitzsimmons-Wilkinson household Australia Day party, Jack. Bring your own barbecue chips.
Yeah, well, it's no longer on Australia Day. You've got to remember that. They've shifted it.
Because they
no longer approve of Australia Day.
Okay. I've forgotten that. Yeah, this is true. But we are dealing with precious egos, aren't we?
Yeah, people as sanctimonious as that never approve of Australia Day. You just sometimes in life, I think, you just got to dust yourself off and
just
do something
take your
else.
licks. Take your licks. and go, all right, I don't agree with it, but that's the way it came out. But, she's popped back for her hat, as Justice Lee did in fact say in regard to Bruce Lim. And meanwhile, Jack's only a couple of days away. The US first presidential debate. It will take place on Thursday, June 27, only a couple of days away, probably 3 days away, 9 p.m. US Eastern Time.
Yeah, Friday morning, Oz time.
Yeah, that's right. So, fair bit at stake, Jack.
Yeah, this is odd, really, because generally speaking, the debates are starting very early on the US calendar.
Unusually early this time.
But generally speaking, one of the candidates in a US presidential election, at least at this stage, is sort of largely unknown to a fair bit of the population. Bill Clinton was a popular governor of Arkansas, but not much known out of it. But these two are the best known debate candidates ever. Joe Biden's been in politics for 50 years. He was vice president for 8. He's been president for 4. Donald Trump is the...
Well, hardly anyone knows who he is.
Yeah, he's the best known man in the United States.
Probably the most.
And people have generally made up their minds about both of them.
Might I offer the opinion that probably Joe Biden's got more at stake here than does Donald Trump. When we've talked about this on previous programs, if it doesn't go well, if there are sort of long silences or misspeaking, all that sort of stuff, that it might might lead to a tap on the shoulder, and this is why they're going early, perhaps.
It could be. I mean, there's been some great debates in the past, and I was talking to an American friend about it, and he said, "Do you remember the Nixon Kennedy debate?"
Yeah.
I said, "Well, how can you remember it? You would have been about 1."
Yeah. It has entered the popular culture. Yeah.
Yeah, and the important thing is that at that stage, a lot of Americans listened to it on radio. And as well as watching on the television, and the people on the radio thought that Nixon had won the debate because they didn't get the visuals on all the people who watched on the television thought that Kennedy won and won handily because Nixon was looked a bit unshaven and greasy face, whereas John Kennedy was smooth, good looking, all that kind of stuff, modern, So that was a kind of a game changer. But my personal favourite from the debates was the Mondale-Reagan moment when Reagan was standing for re-election. And the moderator asked him, your age has become a question and the age of the candidates has become a question in the campaign. And Reagan's response was to smile and say, I will not use my opponent's youth and inexperience against him in the campaign. And Mondale laughed just like you did, but you sort of felt that he knew that, well, that's the election gone.
Well, there was a fair point to be made. I mean, what we know now is that there had been an assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan, and that he was, for want of I don't want to get into the specifics of it, but he was in ill health for his second term. But look, he won. He won his second term. I think Mondale won his home state, and I'm just trying to think where that was. Might have been Minnesota. Yeah,
Minnesota.
And that was it. That was the only state he won.
And he won that by a couple hundred votes. I think that was it.
So he got it. It was
but you could see that on his
school
face.
Thrashing.
You could see that on his face when he laughed in the debate that that was it. It was over.
It's a pretty good comeback. Pretty good comeback. I mean, these guys now, Biden and Trump to a degree, it's very, very difficult to tell Donald how to handle himself in a debate, but he'd pick up things. They will be wargaming all of this stuff right now. They will be rehearsing They'll have specialists in terms of body language, in terms of messaging and all that sort of stuff going through this constant rehearsal. So lots at stake, probably more for Joe Biden than there is for Donald Trump.
I don't think most of that prep works all that well. People have just, in this situation, it's kind of high pressure. You've got to be yourself.
Yeah, look, I know what you mean, but there are set responses like the one you just mentioned with Reagan. I reckon that probably was a war game thing because at some point Walter Mondale might have mentioned, or the interrogators at the debate, the moderators there would have asked a question about Ronald Reagan's age. So that was. I'm sure that would have been a fairly well-prepared response. So they'll do that. They'll just sort of war game, some of the weaknesses. And Biden will be asked about his mental capacity, and Trump will be asked about his. So they need to know that if someone says, "Look, the American people are quite concerned about your mental capacity going forward," and then there's a long silence from either one of them while they look confused, that would be extremely bad. So they'll need to know how to respond to it.
The biggest hurdle, I think that's the biggest hurdle Biden faces. If you put together videos of him during his vice presidency and videos of him talking now, the difference is stark.
Yeah, I know a lot of. Just to be fair, there's a lot of video that gets circulated around Biden on social media and so that's clearly slowed down, and it tends to make him look dithery and all those sorts of things. You won't get to CNN is hosting, but everyone else is simulcasting. All their networks are simulcasting, and you won't get that opportunity. You'll have a good hard look at what both men are like. Just had a quick look at the polls, Jack. I'm sort of preferring 538 only because they weight their polls. There was a Fox poll which Donald blew up about that put Biden 2 points in front, and as you've made the point, he needs to be about 5 or 6 in front. Still languishing behind in most battleground states. But
Nate Silver says that gap is 3%. Nate Silver, on his calculation, Biden needs to be 3% in front to be 50-50.
Yeah. So
I think it's bigger than that.
5. Yeah, I think it's got to be 5 because you've got the big states of New York and California. That are just going to be overwhelming blue. But there is a bit of a trend, and it predates the conviction. So it's not a response to what happened in New York when Trump was convicted of 34 offences. It goes back to early April, and just there is, whether it's a trend or whether it's just a levelling is too difficult to know at this stage. But the Trumpster's down about a couple of points since April. Across all polling and weighted as Nate Silver does at 538. It's now owned by ABC too, isn't it, Jack?
I think
538. It is. He sold the lot. There's money to be made in punditry. Meanwhile, Jack, across the trench in New Zealand, a bit of a stink has arisen over a woman who thought her boyfriend was going to take her to the airport and look after her dogs while she was away, and he's failed the front, and so she's taken him to court, Jack.
Taking him to something called the New Zealand Disputes Tribunal.
Oh God, can you imagine that? It'd be like our VCATs and things like that. I better not knock VCAT. My brother's a senior member there now. No, I'm not knocking it. I'm not knocking it. But why you would think having a stink with your boyfriend because he didn't take you to the airport, and worse, that's what I think he should have been. He should have been upbraided for was the treatment of the dogs. He wasn't going to look after them. But why you would take that to an external dispute and then suffer all the humiliation about being reported on in New Zealand news and getting onto our podcast?
She was sitting at home expecting him to pick her up and take her to the airport and look after the dogs. So she had to stay because he didn't turn up. She had to stay there and organise for the dogs to be put in kennels. That meant that she had to get a new flight, and that cost her more money. And her response to that was, well, not to have a Barney with the boyfriend, which most of us would do, but to rattle off to court and make a complete fool of herself.
Yes, it seems a very odd way to deal with a relationship problem. I did note this, and I think this is from the New Zealand Herald. The tribunal referee, Chrissy Cowie, has dismissed the women's claims, and the couple have now separated, Jack.
Yeah, that was surprising news, wasn't it?
I think that's probably where they should have gone first. That should have been where it all went first. And you go, okay, well, I learned my lesson. This bloke won't look after my dogs. He's cost me a bloody fortune in airfares. So I'm going to give him the arse. That's where it should have ended. But no, I'm going to take my boyfriend to court, basically. Very, very funny thing.
Perhaps we could set up a Zoom meeting between this woman and Lisa Wilkinson. They could exchange notes on what's the best way to go about this.
How do you feel? The first question would have to be, how do you feel about being the subject of national humiliation? Because, no matter how angry you are right now, that's where this is going to end up. Win, lose or draw, that's what's going to happen to you.
Yeah. Ask yourself, am I making this worse?
There you go. There's the test. There's the standard question that people need to ask themselves before they clamber into a courtroom. Meanwhile, Jack, I mean, the Tories aren't just shooting themselves in the foot. They've got the machine guns out now, and there are toes and ankles flying all over the place. The latest disgrace is, I think, 5 or is it 6? 5 people with links to Rishi Sunak or the Conservative Party are being investigated by the gambling watchdog over having a punt on the date of the election. It was a bit of a snap election, wasn't it, Jack? Called for July 4.
And the allegation is that they were using information obtained
inside
to do so. This was just one of the funniest story of the week, I thought. I stopped counting at about 3 or 4, but the first one was a close personal protection officer, a policeman.
Yeah, so he's unnamed. It's the bloke who's basically a bodyguard for Sunak.
Yeah, he's on suspension.
He's been suspended.
The next one was a woman who was a candidate for the Conservative Party.
Yeah, this is Laura Saunders.
Still is a candidate.
She's married to the Conservatives' campaign director, Tony Lee, so he's involved in it too.
Yes. And then there was a senior advisor to Rishi Sunak who had also hopped online and had a little bet with Paddy Power or whoever it was.
That'll be
the date of the election.
That might be Nick Mason, Jack.
That sounds right.
Not the drummer of Pink Floyd, I think, but he's the party's chief data officer since 2022. Another one embroiled in this, Jack, is the MP for Montgomery, Shear and Glyndwr. That's Welsh, so I hope I got the pronunciation near enough. And another close confidant of Sunak. He won his seat in 2019 with 53% of the vote. That's Craig Williams. I suspect he's going to get a belting. I loved. He's still involved. He's still a candidate. He's on the ballot. Laura Saunders, married to the Conservative campaign director Tony Lee. They're on what's called a leave of absence now, Jack, as is Nick Mason, we mentioned before, also on a leave of absence during a campaign. So everything's going beautifully there. Sarah Vine in the Daily Mail, Daily Mirror, Daily Mail.
Daily Mail
Has opined that one should never see politicians dancing, and that's a very good argument to be made. Theresa May, who can forget that, Jack? I'm still scrubbing my eyes with bleach most nights when I think about her. But Prince William, I didn't see the dancing, so I don't know if it was any good or not. But he was at Taylor Swift's London concert, and apparently wasn't flash.
Yeah, no, not great. Sarah Vine was married, has only recently separated from Michael Gove.
Oh, yes, of course.
And
Lord Michael Gove, isn't it now? Or is it Sir?
No, I don't think it's either.
Okay.
And she added him into the list because there was video of him looking like he'd been overserved at a club up in Scotland somewhere, doing a sort of an embarrassingly bad dance. And this was before the last election, I think it was. But,
what do you do when you're asked to dance, Jack, or your lovely wife?
I do my best to avoid it.
I just say no. It's just the best way to go.
I mean, did Peter Costello dancing on Kerry-Ann Kennelly's show help him at all?
It humanised him to a point, but we were starting from a pretty low point at the time. So look, public officials do not dance. I did see Robbie Williams, Jack, who can dance a bit. Robbie Williams, he was out in the Carlton footy jumper. Have you seen that?
I saw a video with Robbie with a Robbie on the back of the Carlton footy jumper.
He was out in the streets of London, and people were actually saying, and they actually sort of identified the Carlton logo.
Yeah, unfortunately, it was an old-fashioned Carlton jumper. It had no orange on it at all.
Oh, well, that was only just the 1 week. Look, just while we trounced Geelong, Jack, we don't take it all that serious. The orange socks, that's the first win I've had with the orange socks, I think, for a long time.
I walked into the pub Friday night and thought, how come the Giants are playing Geelong?
That's what a lot of people thought, but then we saw Tom DeConnick just blitz Geelong almost single-handedly. Not quite single-handedly, but by geez, a good footballer. Meanwhile, Jack, we'll get to sport shortly. We can't talk about the Carlton Footy Club all the time, although I'd love to. India, Jack. There was most of us thought that Prime Minister Narendra Modi would be returned to power without any real problems, but the election did throw up a result where he cannot now form majority government and will need the support of other parties to get his legislation through. And his political rival, Rahul Gandhi, very famous name, Jack, he'd be related to Indira, I presume.
He is, and of course to Nehru, her father.
The father of, basically the father of the creation of the nation of India. He's saying that things are going to blow up within Modi's party, and there is a fair amount of disagreement among Modi's colleagues, and that he might not survive this. Well, I guess my answer to that would be Rahul Gandhi would say that, wouldn't he?
Yeah, he would. But there seems to be some evidence that he's right. It's early days yet, and it's a big country, and politics is complicated there. But it's one to watch. It certainly isn't clear that that Modi will be able to form a stable government, and there's at least some prospect that someone else will become Prime Minister, probably Gandhi, either now or later.
Yeah, the election result, and I'm quoting here, saw the opposition, which is led by the National Congress, and that's Gandhi's party, perform far better than forecast, winning 234 of 543 seats in India's lower house to the BJP-led National Democratic Alliance's 293. Not a lot of difference there, 60 odd seats, but as I say, the BJP don't have a majority. And Gandhi saying the numbers are such that they are very fragile and the smallest disturbance can drop the government. Basically, one ally has to turn the other way. He claimed there was great discontent within Modi's camp and that there were people who are in touch with us from within it, telling him that. Yes, it was supposed to be an absolute unmitigated triumph for Modi, and it's just turned out to be completely different, Jack.
It has.
It's one to watch, and I think Modi is the first Prime Minister since Nehru. We mentioned him before, who's won 3 successive elections. Well, we'll put Modi down for 2.5 at this stage, and we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, 2, 3 if he can form a government.
All right, Jack. Now, I hate to tell the listeners this, but everything is going badly. We're living through a dumpster fire of an historical moment, and things have never been worse. And is that actually true? I'll let you go on this first, and then I'll get back with my own opinions.
I read this piece from the Scientific American, and they think it is. We're living through a dumpster fire.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I would love to see who wrote this.
Yeah, I didn't see who the author was.
It's not an editorial.
It legitimately came from the Scientific American. And they have a long list of all the awful things that are happening in the world. But it just seems to miss the point that there's really, P.J. O'Rourke wrote about this 25 years ago. There's never been a better time to be alive.
Yeah, look, I totally agree with that. So just for our listeners' sake, this is Marianne Cooper and Maxim Voronov who've written this piece. It's an opinion piece. So I think there is this prevailing sense that we are in very, very difficult times, and things have never been worse than they are now. And I'm just not buying it. We can talk about how many people have been delivered from abject poverty in the last 50 years, and 1
billion.
I was going to say that number's in the billions. And we can talk about living during a world war or the Great Depression. I would have thought things were a little worse then. I mean, it's just this. The thing that bugs me most about it is there's no real understanding of history. It's like people wake up and go, "Gee, I feel a bit awful today." There's climate change. There's a war in Ukraine. There's war in Gaza. Donald Trump could be elected, turn the republic, or render the republic in the United States extinct, and there'll be further conflict. And it doesn't even amount to a hill of beans compared to the world between 1929 and 1945. I mean,
yes,
don't even get close.
No.
And when people were in wretched poverty, and we're not just talking about John Steinbeck's characters making their way through drought-stricken America. We're talking about people in the developing world that wasn't really developing, that was basically the subject of intense colonial exploitation, and people not being offered educations and things like that. What we have is the first thing is we're all a lot smarter than we were in, let's say, 1950. We've got access to the greatest library the world has ever created at our fingertips on a mobile phone. We can find out answers to complex situations. We can actually study history on it and find that things actually weren't that bad. I mean, do you want to just do the assessment of life expectancy? I know Thames Water letting a fair amount of fecal matter into drinking water in London, one of the Tories' privatisation schemes that really hasn't taken off. But if you did live in 1850, there's a very, very real chance that you'd die. That you would die of some appalling illness, typhoid, diphtheria, and your life expectancy was probably about 30 or 40 years. I'd have to check, but probably 30 or 40 years what it is now.
Yeah, I mean, in our own family, we have a shared family. My father used to say when they were kids, people would ask how many children were there in the family, and he said we just say 8 and 2 dead.
That's right.
Because that was and
these were constants. That infant mortality was a very serious thing.
Yeah, so they had 2 that just didn't grow into being teenagers. Didn't survive.
That's right.
And that was pretty much standard.
I think my memory is one died at birth, one died at 4.
Yeah.
Look, well, just rather than keep our listeners listen to us gripe about this stuff, I'll just read from the Scientific American piece. It says, if it seems like things are kind of off these days, you're not alone. Gee, I hate that language too, by the way. If I was an editor at Scientific American, I'd send that back saying, please do better. Recently, more than 100,000 people liked the post marking the start of the pandemic that said 4 years ago this week was the last normal week of our lives. What? Objectively speaking, we are living through a dumpster fire of a historical moment. Right now, more than 1 million people are displaced and at risk of starvation in Gaza, as are millions more in Sudan. Wars are on the rise around the globe. That's actually not right. That's not historically accurate, Jack. And 2023 saw the most civilian casualties in almost 15 years. Were they counting Congo Wars 1 and 2? I wonder. Anyway, HF-N1 bird flu has jumped to cows. Several farm workers have been infected, and scientists are warning about another potential pandemic. Man, this is grim stuff. Last year was the hottest ever and recorded. Yes, we are dealing with climate change, and that is, potentially existential. But you and I, and probably most of our listeners, Jack, we lived through a time when basically the 2 military superpowers around the world were routine and basically had a quivering index finger over a red button for about 30 years that would have obliterated the planet.
Yeah. Even if you're an oppressed minority, as they tend to style themselves these days, there's never been a better time to be alive. There's never been a better time to be a black American or to be a woman anywhere in the Western world, pretty much.
That's not to say that things are perfect, but
no, it doesn't.
Yes,
yeah.
but things are, and that we should stop reforms and we should stop the business of, or we should wherever possible stop discrimination on the basis of gender and race, religious affiliation, sexual preference, etc.
But it's ahistorical nonsense to ignore the progress has already been made.
Where was the comment that really caught my eye? The one about more wars now than ever. I mean, are you kidding me? Most people, you mentioned the Congolese Wars 1 and 2, around the turn of the century, around the turn of the 21st century, and they'll look at you like you're an idiot. There's over 5 million casualties there. Didn't make the news. Just didn't make the news. Nate Silver's got a different. We mentioned him before, of course. Nate Silver, 538 guy, sold out to the ABC. Good luck to him. Nate Silver said he's got a different view, Jack. Failure to recognise the tremendous progress that humanity has made. Literally billions of people lifted out of poverty, vastly longer lifespans, expansion of rights and freedoms is probably the single biggest sign of, what does he call it, Jack? Mid-witticism. Interesting.
I think it's a Nate Silver invention, that
I
one.
think that is a new word, Jack. I've never come across it before. But there's a general pessimism, and I think that's part of the human spirit. I don't think it's changed particularly in the last 100 years, but there is something uniquely pessimistic about the way we approach our lives, collectively, I suppose. I mean, people have been saying it's the worst time to be alive, as far as I can think, in op-eds for the last 30 years. And it's just not true.
No.
Not by any measure. Enjoy your lives, people. Every day in the vertical is a good day.
I certainly try and get through life that way.
Meanwhile, Joe, I don't know if you saw it. In fact, I think everybody has. But the Stop Oil folks, they set upon what's it called? The monolith, the stone model,
Stonehenge.
Stonehenge. They set upon it, and I mean, it was John Kadelka's joke. He said, "Don't worry, once the polar ice caps melt, they'll wash all that stuff off then." I got a bit upset watching that. I just thought, why this? You were jacking something that was knocked out in the Stone Age, other than you're just out of control narcissists who want as much media coverage as you possibly can get.
Yeah, I thought the same thing, and I found this in the UK Telegraph. So hat tip to Michael Deacon, who wrote it. He was remembering a T.S. Eliot play, and one of the characters says this: half the harm that is done in this world is due to people who want to feel important. They don't mean to do harm, but the harm does not interest them. Or they do see it, or they justify it because they are absorbed in the endless struggle to think well of themselves. And that's exactly how I feel about the Just Stop Oil people.
Well, it is an expression of narcissism. We do know climate change is an issue. We do know fossil fuels contribute significantly to it. But it's not as if we can just turn these things off without causing absolute mayhem, chaos, starvation, poverty around the world. So we have to get the balance right and hope that, like hell, we do get it right. As for running around hurling orange dye on Stonehenge, cut it out.
Yeah, I thought that. Was that why you were wearing the orange socks on Friday night at Carlton Box?
You just won't let it go. But we do need to move on to sport, and we'll start with the AFL. You said, did the Giants play twice? And a number of people did say that, and there were actual people quite seriously going, they look like the Giants were playing. But Carlton has this Carlton Respects movement. It's a fundraising drive to provide education around the prevention of domestic violence. The players go into schools. And there's a lovely little story, because I'm sort of part of that the big Carlton family. Lovely little story of a little girl who came home and that had a couple of the Blues players in the classroom that day. And Mum said, "Well, what did they say?" He goes, "They told us how to be better people. They showed us how to be better people." So nothing wrong with that at all. They can wear orange once a year and go through all that. It's good community stuff. They were terrific. Tom DeConning's first quarter, Jack, according to the rating system, was the best game, best half of football played by a footballer since these stats were kept, Jack. He is becoming the best ruckman in the competition outside of the Sydney Swans. Thing, that the development of the sort of bottom six getting into the Carlton team has really been something to see. They've got enormous depth there now, and they've got guys who really want to play. Other hand, Sydney did play the Giants. Very similar.
Who were tired after having played Friday night.
Yeah. Very, very good, Jack. Very good. Similar story to when the Swans have played good sides before, or aspiring sides before. Quarter of fairly even football, halfway through the second quarter, foot on the gas, off we go, and basically it was done at half time. And that's against a good side, potential top four side. So where are you going with your top four, Jack, right now? I mean, Sydney.
Sydney, Carlton and Collingwood are in. And the last spot I would give to Brisbane.
Yeah, they are coming. There's no doubt about that. I think Freo have got a bit of a chance as well. I think Essendon will play finals for the first time in a long time, but they'll finish in the sort of bottom half of the eight. Who else have we got coming? There's really
the Bulldogs. The Bulldogs'
best is really good, but their worst is terrible. So you've got that uneven thing. I expect them to play finals, and they can, because their best is good, they can really dirty up and do some damage. But you mentioned the Brisbane Lions. I think they've got all the weapons. They've got that very broad midfield. They are the ones who can hit the finals in really good nick and do some damage when they get there.
They're the only ones. They and Sydney are the only ones who are hitting all of the champion data markets to be a premier at the moment.
What to be a premier? I mean, I reckon Carlton's the number one seed at the moment, right now, and that's because I think they've got about 20% to improve, and I think the Swans have got about 10%, and that's why I think they'll go very, very close.
Champion Data have got Champion Data. What do they call it? There's 6 markers. I think 5 or 6 markers. And this is sort of 100% track record in the last 11 premiers or whatever it is. And the only 2 are hitting all 5 or all 6, whatever it is, are Sydney and Brisbane.
I reckon if I asked you who was going to be premiers in the last 5 years, and not just because
at round 15.
Yeah, round 15. Now, I mean, you and I would both probably got it wrong. Yeah. Collingwood's win last year, that was unexpected. Geelong's, I think the year before that, by round 15 we might have had a closer idea, but at the start of the season you wouldn't have backed Geelong to play in a grand final. So these things are they're constant surprises, and I think we're sort of going into this by saying there might only be 1 or 2 or 3 teams in it. That might be a little bit premature to say, but my tip, of course, with obvious bias, is that Carlton is the number 1 seed in the AFL at the moment. In racing, Jack, you can take us away for that. As for won a Group 1 at Ascot.
Yeah, it used to be called the King Stan. It's now called the King Charles, I think. And she was trained by a Victorian fella, and she was really in Australia. I would rate her as a B plus, or at her best an A minus mare. She's won a Group 2, won a Group 3. Managed to run second in a Group 1, but that's as close as she got in about 6 tries. But she went over there and won a Group 1 easily at Ascot. So
that's because Australia's got better sprinters, Jack.
Just an indication that our sprinters are pretty good. I think their middle distance horses beat ours pretty comfortably, but our sprinters are top quality.
Yeah. Golf,
and especially given she's raced by the breeder. Because she was passed in at auction at $24,000.
Wow. Well, he's got some pretty clear profit on all of that. Father's Day golf, Jack. Rory McIlroy blows the PGA, missing 2 4-footers. Oh, I saw this. It's actually sad to watch when you see a bloke do pretty much what I do on a golf course if I'm just not concentrating and just miss 3 or 4 tap-ins. in a row and make it worse every time.
Yeah, and he got the huff and didn't hang around for interviews.
he was pretty
just
cross.
Straight into the Escalade and away he went. The same day, this was Father's Day in the Northern Hemisphere. There's a wonderful video of a golf match that's gone wrong. There are 6 blokes belting the tripes out of each other. Just off the green in a place called Raccoon Hill Golf Club in Kent, Ohio. And investigations are undertaken as to what had gone wrong. And it appears that one of the players to win the match had a 4-footer and thought it should have been treated as a gimme.
4-footers aren't a gimme.
Yeah,
Let me step in here and play umpire, but a 4-footer is not a gimme.
Yeah, and there was a dispute as to whether that ruling was correct or not. And
punch-ups ensued.
A good old-fashioned Barney. I haven't seen one like it since, what was the pub in Clifton Hill that my brother-in-law and I used to meet at Friday nights for a drink?
Not the Terminus. No,
not the Terminus. Just down the road, and it was full of Irish building workers. And on Friday night,
it's a McDonald's now, mate. It's a McDonald's. Yeah. That's the one. And it was the United Kingdom, wasn't it?
Something like that. Anyway, these Irish building workers would we'd be knocking the spots off each other on Friday night, and if you were back in there on Saturday, they'd be arm in arm singing again. No,
that's the Irish for you, Jack. Meanwhile, Jack, the Euros rolling along. Poland and Austria played a wonderful game. England may well make it to the semis. We'll see. Yeah. Early days yet, but who's going to win it?
Who's going to win it? Safe tips always to say Germany or Spain.
Well, Germany, Spain, or France. Yeah, France probably the best side in it.
Yeah. Now, what did you think about? There was a few of the Dutch fans have been fantastic. I don't know whether you. I
did see some very funny stuff with the Scots too.
Yeah. The GWS Giants social media people are quite funny. And they grabbed a clip of the Dutch team. There would be 4,000 or 5,000 easily people in a street in Leipzig in Germany, all jumping up and down and singing. And the Giants have used this and said, well, Giants fans on the way to next week's game because they're all in orange.
And it worked. It became. I mean, people were astonished to see what looked to be about 100,000 Giants fans heading towards the showgrounds, which is a capacity, I think, of about 22,000. On the way, yes, it was a lovely bit of work. Lovely bit of work. I'm going to go out and say France, but we shall see about all of that. All we want, obviously, Jack, between you and me, is just to see England get close and then get beaten. That will. Yeah. That's all I'm in it for, really.
Now, something I hadn't raised with you before, but the NRL, there's a big piece, I think it was in the Oz, about Wayne Bennett having signed for the Rabbitohs for next year, and about whether that's okay for him to. And everyone's acknowledging that he's having conversations with the South Sydney Rugby League Club now. And giving them advice while he's still coaching the Dolphins this year. Yeah. What do you think?
I think there's a lot of practices around recruiting and player transfers and coach transfers that the NRL really needs to tidy up. You've got a whole bunch of players now who are already signed to play with other clubs, and that's well known. And when you get to it, something like a coach, you've got to ask yourself, in a game that has an unfortunate, like most of our sport has an unfortunate but very close relationship with gaming, has everyone fair income?
Yeah.
And that overtly tells you that it isn't.
Yes, yeah. No, I just think it's embarrassing.
Yeah, it needs to get tidied up to the point where, I mean, it's like the NRL says, well, after October when we have the grand final, then we all just go on holidays for 3 months. I mean, the AFL doesn't do that. That's the time when you do all your trading. But what we don't have is, what the AFL doesn't have is a coach selected, he'll be coaching next year. I mean, he'll be coaching another side next year while he's coaching. And basically what we saw with the former Richmond coach, Dimmer. Dimmer resigned as coach of Richmond Football Club and then signed up to coach the Suns this season. So those things aren't happening. So
if you're an assistant coach at an AFL club and another club is looking for a coach next year and they sign you, you pack up your gear and leave. Yeah. I can remember seeing this during one of Geelong's premierships. Was it Brenton Sanderson who went to coach the Crows?
Yeah, something like that. Yes, that's right.
He was appointed to the Crows with about 4 or 5 weeks of the season to go. So he left Geelong immediately. Yeah. And I can remember after the game, Chris Scott's walking around the ground and sees Sanderson in the crowd, and they embraced in big hugs because they'd spent most of the year working together to achieve the premiership. But because Sanderson had taken a job somewhere else, he wasn't in the box. He wasn't part of it on the day. And that's how it should be.
They need to fix that up. They need to really fix that up.
I'm surprised Peter Volandis hasn't done something about it. He's a pretty smart dude.
We're not suggesting that the coach of the Dolphins off to South is involved in anything untoward, but the potential exists. While you've got these rather crazy situations where they're coaching one club and basically running down the clock.
Yes. I can't have it. What about the T20? Afghanistan knocked off Australia?
Well, so did India last night, mate. I watched it. Rohit Sharma.
Oh, that's been played, has it?
Yeah. No, Rohit Sharma. Well, they lost. Australia lost by about 20 or 22, 20, 25 runs, something like 27, I think it was. India got about 205, and it was just a bit too much for Australia. Rohit Sharma, made a blitzing 80 odd, scoring at around about 300%. And Australia's fielding's been very poor. Catches dropped and things like that, particularly in the Afghanistan game. So now Australia will sit nervously by the TV watching Bangladesh v Afghanistan. If Afghanistan wins, well, that's goodbye. Everyone jumps on the burner and comes home. If Bangladesh wins, Bangladesh would have to win quickly. I think one of the scenarios is that they would have to win within 14 overs or make a certain amount of runs by a certain number of overs to get their run rate above that of Australia and Bangladesh. So nervous times for the Australians. To be honest, they haven't played well enough. And I did see the game against Afghanistan. Number of catches went down there too. And it's just sometimes things don't work.
Yep.
And India look very good there. England starting to play some very good cricket. Josh Butler got a very quick 80-odd. I'm just trying to think he might have got against the US, I think, which is you might say is not great opposition. But the Americans have been pretty good. So England might have their game going in the right direction, but India look very, very difficult to beat, and Australia will be flat out making it to the semi-finals. What else you got to take us out, Jack?
Oh, this from Twitter. I quite like. I shared this with my daughter, who's got 3 grandkids. This is from Twitter. My child fell down the stairs. This is the mummy Facebook groups. Why were you not watching her? Are your stairs not bubble wrapped? Are you not feeding your child organic home
one of those little gates on
food?
the stairs, Jack.
Did you not douse your child with essential oils? Meanwhile, the daddy Facebook groups LMFAO.
Maybe even a little video of the kid falling over. I'm just
Yeah,
in the
and
business now, Jack. I'm not handy, as you know. You're an old chippy, of course, but I'm not handy. But I've got to build the little gate. You can buy them in Bunnings and so forth, and assemble them yourselves. And there's a little gate going down my flight of stairs for the little one.
Good.
So
Good.
wish me luck with that, mate. There's bound to be a lot of swearing, and there may be some broken plaster.
Yeah, I'll just leave you with this last little bit.
Right.
This is from the news from the United States. A chap found $4 million worth of cocaine while looking for sea turtle nests on Amelia Island beach in Nassau County, Florida. Nassau County is the northernmost coastal county. It's almost in Georgia. According to the police, the 70 pounds of cocaine bricks are worth a million in brick form with a street value of around $4 million. It's very rare here in Nassau County to find cocaine so far north. Nothing like this. So this is in the news, and immediately there were comments below it saying, climate change is driving the cocaine north as the water temperatures increase. It's estimated that due to global warming, southern cocaine will in 25 years have displaced native northern cocaine as far as north as Chesapeake Bay. So there's still plenty of people with not enough to do who hang around the comment section on newspapers just to have a bit of fun.
Well, that's fine enough. Look, there are a number of documentaries made about cocaine drops and money drops and things like that. It's not Pirates of the Caribbean treasure, but there's still a fair bit out there around the Florida Keys and into Bermuda and places like that. There will be a lot of cocaine that's hit the deck. Some of it might not be worth anything, but there'll be a lot of cash there too.
Yeah, well, there were some people making that suggestion. Are we meant to believe he was looking for turtle nests, or was he looking for cocaine?
Well, he did hand it in, Jack. I mean, the problem is if you found something like that.
He handed one brick in.
Did he? If he hung on to them, he might have some pretty powerful enemies, mate. Yeah. And end up with the shoes on the electricity poles, which I think is one of those Mexican signs of death looming. So hopefully he's done the right thing, or he might have some rather angry people knocking on his door. Well, thank you for your contribution today, Jack, and that takes us out for the show. Quick reminder as we go, if you want to drop us a line, make a comment, criticism, whatever it might be, you can get hold of me, or you can get hold of both of us at the Conditional Release Program at gmail.com. And you can get hold of me on Twitter. My DMs are always open. That's at Jack the Insider. And you get hold of Jack on his Substack. Give it to me, Jack.
HongKongJack.substack.com.
Yeah, drop us a line. Make us feel loved. All right, guys, that's it for episode 78. We'll take it out now. We'll look forward to talking to you in the new financial year.